Imagine you're working on a file, you try to run it, and Linux hits you with permission denied. So you search online, and the most common fix? This chmod command. It works, but that little command can quietly break your security, especially on shared systems. Linux was built as a multi-user system. That means every file has rules. Who can read it, who can change it, and who can execute it. In this video, we'll show you how Linux file permissions actually work, from RWX and numeric modes to ownership and much more. By the end, you won't guess permission numbers anymore. You'll understand them. Let's get started. Being a multi-user system means that on the same machine you might have several users, background services, and server applications all accessing files at the same time. Because of that, every file and every directory needs rules that control who is allowed to do what. These rules are what prevents one user from modifying another user's data or a program from accessing files it shouldn't. They're also an important part of the system's security. In Linux, every file and directory has three basic permissions: read, write, and execute. Read allows you to view the contents of a file. Write allows you to modify or delete it. And execute allows you to run a file as a program or access a directory. But Linux doesn't just ask, can this file be read? It asks who is trying to read it. That's why permissions are defined for three different categories of users: the owner of the file, the group the file belongs to, and everyone else on the system. When you list files in the terminal, these permissions appear as a sequence of letters like this. The first three characters describe the permissions for the owner, the next three for the group, and the final three for others. Together, they define exactly who can read, modify, or execute a file. Once you understand this basic structure, the rest of the permission system becomes much easier to work with. Now, let's take a look at how we can examine those permissions in more detail. When working with files in Linux, we can view detailed information about them using the ls command with the L flag. Running this command lists files in a long format, showing additional metadata such as permissions, ownership, file size, and more. One of the most important parts of this output is the permission string at the beginning of each line. For example, here we can see entries like these. This string is the same permission structure we discussed in the previous chapter, where the characters represent the access rights assigned to the owner, the group, and other users on the system. The very first character in this string, which we didn't mention earlier, indicates the type of file. A dash represents a regular file, while the letter D indicates a directory. You may also encounter other types, such as L for symbolic links or letters like C, B, P, or S for special device or system files. In most everyday situations, however, you will mainly see regular files and directories. The remaining 9 characters represent the actual permissions themselves, expressed using the familiar read, write, and execute symbols. While these letters are useful for quickly interpreting permissions, Linux also provides a numeric way to represent them, which is commonly used when modifying permissions. Each permission corresponds to a specific value. Read equals 4, write equals 2, and execute equals 1. By adding these values together, we can describe any combination of permissions with a single number. For example, the combination RWX includes all 3 permissions, so its value is 7. The combination RW gives read and write access, but no execute permission, which results in 6. Similarly, RX equals 5, WX equals 3, and a completely restricted set of permissions, represented by 3 dashes, corresponds to 0. These numeric values are what allows us to change permissions using the chmod command. Instead of specifying each permission individually, we can simply provide 3 numbers that correspond to the permissions for the owner, group, and others. For instance, running chmod 755 grants the owner full read, write, and execute access, while the group and other users receive read and execute permissions. This configuration is commonly used for executable files and directories. On the other hand, a command such as chmod 777 would give all users full permissions. Although this may make a file immediately accessible, it also removes most access restrictions and can introduce security risks, especially on shared systems. Understanding how these numeric values correspond to the permission string allows you to quickly interpret the output of ls and confidently adjust file permissions when necessary. In case you'd like to learn more about these Linux commands, You can check out our video about common Linux commands in the description. Looking again at the same ls output we examined in the previous chapter, we can now focus on the next two fields after the permission string, the owner and the group associated with each file. Every file and directory in Linux belongs to a specific user and to a specific group, and together these determine how the permissions we discussed earlier are applied. The owner usually corresponds to the user who created the file, while the group allows permissions to be shared among multiple users. For example, several users such as John, Alice, and Bob might all belong to a group like staff, allowing them to collaborate on shared files or directories. You can check which groups a user belongs to using the groups command. Running groups John will display the groups for that particular user, while running groups without any arguments simply shows the groups of the current user. Here you can see that John belongs to the sudo group, which means that he has admin privileges. Ownership itself can be modified using the chown command. For example, chown Alice scripts.py transfers ownership of the file to the user Alice, while chown Alice:devs scripts.py changes both the owner and the group at the same time. If you only need to modify the group associated with a file, the chgrp command can be used instead, such as chgrp sales report.txt. Together with file permissions, ownership, and group membership provide a flexible way to manage access to files on multi-user Linux systems and avoid having to manually configure each user's permissions individually. In addition to the standard read, write, and execute permissions, Linux also supports 3 special permission bits that modify how files and directories behave. These are known as SUID, SGID, and the sticky bit. The SUID bit, or set user ID, allows a program to run with the permissions of the file's owner rather than the user who executes it. A common example is the password command, which lets regular users update their passwords even though the underlying system files require elevated privileges. The SUID bit can be set using the command chmod u+s, where u refers to the file's owner or user and the plus sign adds the permission. When active, it appears as an S in the owner's execute position. The SGID bit, or set group ID, works in a similar way but applies to groups. When set on a directory, files created inside it automatically inherit the directory's group ownership, which is especially useful in shared project folders. Likewise, it can be enabled with chmod g+s, where G represents the group, and it appears as an S in the group's execute position. The sticky bit is typically used on special shared directories, such as TMP. When this bit is set, users can only delete files that they themselves created, even if the directory is writable by others. It can be applied using chmod+t, and it appears as a T in the final position of the permission string. In this command, you don't need to specify the user or group. These symbolic chmod commands can also be reversed using a minus sign, such as chmod u-s, chmod g-s, or chmod-t, which remove the corresponding special permissions. If the execute permission is not set, these indicators appear as uppercase letters, such as S or T, showing that the special bit is present but the file is not executable. You wouldn't generally need permission bits very often, but they are quite useful in the mentioned cases where you need additional control over the permissions. Now that we understand how permissions work and how they can be modified, it's important to look at how they are set by default when new files and directories are created. In Linux, new files don't start without permissions. Instead, they are assigned default values, typically 666 for files and 777 for directories, which correspond to read and write access for files and full access for directories. However, these defaults are not applied directly. They are adjusted by a value called the umask, which determines which permissions should be removed. You can think of the umask as defining the permissions you do not want other users to have by default. You can view the current umask by running this command, which often returns a value like 0022. The reason it has 4 digits is that the first digit represents special permission bits from the previous chapter, while the remaining 3 correspond to the owner, group, and others, just like standard permission values. The key idea is that the umask subtracts permissions from the defaults. For example, starting from 0666 for files and subtracting 0022 results in 0644, while for directories, 0777-0022 results in 0755. We can observe this in practice by creating a file and a directory with these commands, and then listing them with ls. The resulting permissions reflect the effect of the umask. The umask can also be changed using the umask command followed by a new value. For instance, 0077 creates stricter permissions by removing access for other users, while 0002 is often used in shared environments to allow group collaboration. In general, higher umask values result in more restrictive default permissions. Understanding the umask helps you control how accessible your files are by default, which is again especially important on multi-user systems. In some situations, the standard permission model simply isn't flexible enough. For example, when you need to give access to one specific user without affecting everyone else. This is where access control lists or ACLs come in, allowing you to define additional permissions for specific users or groups on top of the usual owner, group, and others. For instance, if we have a file like report.txt and the user Alex needs both read and write permissions, despite not being the owner or a member of the group, we can grant him the needed access using the setFACL command like this. After applying the command, listing the same file using ls gives the permission string with a small plus sign at the end, indicating that extended ACLs are in use. To view these permissions, we can use the getFACL command, which displays both the standard permissions and any additional entries, such as the special permissions we added for Alex specifically. You may also notice a mask entry, which defines the maximum effective permissions for these additional users and groups. Although in most everyday situations, you won't need to modify it directly or even worry about it. ACLs can also be applied to groups using a similar syntax. If you need to remove entries, you can do so using the same setFACL command, but with the X flag instead. And if you're working with a directory, you can apply permissions recursively using the R flag, with which you avoid having to manually set permissions for each file and subdirectory. It should also be noted that on certain Linux systems, you might need to first install the package in order to be able to use ACLs. You can do so using your standard package manager like, for example, sudo apt install ACL on Ubuntu. Overall, ACLs provide a more flexible way to manage access to files, especially in environments where multiple users require different levels of permission or when you simply don't want to create additional groups only for certain files or directories. At this point, you might be wondering what actually happens when you try to open, modify, or execute a file after applying many different permission mechanisms. When a user attempts to access a file or directory, Linux follows a specific sequence of checks to decide whether access should be allowed. The first question it asks is whether the user is the owner of the file. If so, the owner permissions are applied immediately, and no further checks are needed. If the user is not the owner, Linux then checks whether there is a specific ACL entry for that user, like the ones from the previous chapter. If such a rule exists, those permissions are applied. If no user-specific rule is found, Linux moves on to group-related permissions. This includes both the file's primary group and any matching ACL group entries, which are evaluated together to determine the level of access. Finally, if none of the previous conditions apply, Linux falls back to the permissions assigned to others. An important detail is that permissions are not combined across these steps. As soon as a matching category is found, Linux uses those permissions and stops checking further. Understanding this evaluation process helps explain why access is sometimes granted or denied in ways that may not be immediately obvious. Even small mistakes with permissions can lead to surprisingly big problems. One of the most common is setting permissions too loosely, such as using chmod 777, which gives full access to everyone. This can expose files to unintended modification or deletion. Another frequent issue is incorrect ownership, where files or directories are assigned to the wrong user or group. This often results in confusing permission-denied errors. It's also easy to misunderstand the execute permission, since it behaves differently for files and directories, leading to scripts that won't run or directories that can't be accessed. As systems grow more complex, some users tend to overuse ACLs, even when groups would be sufficient, which can make permission management harder to track and debug. Similarly, setting the umask too loosely can create overly permissive defaults, potentially exposing new files to other users without realizing it. And finally, relying on sudo for every command may seem convenient, but it bypasses normal permission checks and increases the risk of accidental system-wide changes. Being aware of these common pitfalls can help you manage permissions more effectively and maintain a more secure and predictable system. After looking at what can go wrong, let's take a quick look at what you should do instead. First, follow the principle of least privilege. Only grant the permissions that are actually needed and nothing more. This reduces the risk of accidental or unwanted access. When working with multiple users, it's usually better to use groups instead of complex ACLs, since they are simpler to manage and easier to understand. Be especially careful with commands like chmod 777. While it may seem like a quick fix, it gives full access to everyone and should generally be avoided in favor of more restrictive permissions. Setting a sensible umask, or simply keeping the default one since you rarely need to modify it, ensures that new files and directories start with secure permissions without requiring constant manual changes. It's also important to use sudo only when necessary. While it might seem easier to avoid permission errors by prefixing every command with sudo, doing so bypasses normal access controls and can lead to unexpected behavior. Make it a habit to check permissions regularly, especially when troubleshooting access issues, using tools like ls or getfacl. And finally, always take a moment to understand what a permission change does before applying it, rather than copying commands blindly. In conclusion, Linux file permissions may seem complex at first, but at their core, they are simply a way of controlling who can access and modify files within a system. By understanding how users, groups, and permissions interact, how access is evaluated, and how tools like chmod, umask, and ACLs work, you gain much more control over your system. Whether you're managing a personal machine or working in a multi-user environment, these concepts play a key role in both usability and security. In practice, permissions are not just about restricting access. They're about organizing collaboration, protecting data, and ensuring that the system behaves in a predictable way. As you continue working with Linux, remember to apply best practices, verify your changes, and think carefully about the level of access you grant. Over time, managing permissions becomes less about memorizing commands and more about understanding how everything fits together. This wraps up our overview of Linux file permissions. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to our channel for more content and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for watching.